The 4 descriptive methods of data collection can be a great way to get information about a wide variety of psychological topics. You want to know what each of these 4 are, how to tell them apart, and in which situations you would use them. So let's start with naturalistic observation. Don't overthink that. It's exactly what it sounds like. You are observing something in its natural environment. We do this when we want a really realistic picture of people or animal behavior, because there's no better place to do that than to just observe in that natural environment. Now clearly you have to take precautions, because if you are seen observing a person or an animal, that might change their behavior. So you have to watch out for something we call the observer effect. You also have to watch out for something called observer bias, which is when 2 people can see the exact same behavior, but their opinions will affect what they write down. For example, you might love snakes, and you're observing a snake in the wild, and you write down, snake is eating its prey. Right? That's very specific, that's very free of bias. But if I hate snakes, which I do, if I hate snakes and I watch that same behavior, I might say, wow, that snake ruthlessly or viciously murdered that poor mouse. Well, that would be wrong of me because my feelings are not part of the observation. My opinion is not part of the observation. So the good thing about naturalistic observation is that you can get a very realistic picture despite the problems that can arise. Sometimes people will use the second method to account for the problems of naturalistic observation, and that method is laboratory observation. Laboratory observation gives researchers a lot of control. If you want to see how panda bears behave in 72.3 degree Fahrenheit weather, well, it's a whole lot easier to bring them into a lab and set that temperature than it is to find a panda in the wild and just cross your fingers that you get that specific temperature. So laboratory observation gives researchers a lot of control. The downside of that is when you bring someone or something into a lab setting, it can also affect their behavior. It might not be the most realistic picture of how they behave. Some people go to sleep labs for sleep research, and you can get a lot of helpful information. But the problem is that you might sleep differently at their sleep lab than you would in your own bed. So it's not as realistic as it could be. The third method is a case study. And a case study is simply a lot of information, a lot of detail about one person's life. We usually only do a case study when we can't or don't want to recreate something. If you are watching a documentary on people who have survived kidnappings, fortunately that's not an everyday occurrence. And we also don't want to intentionally kidnap people and then see how they respond. Clearly that's unethical. But what we can do is take that small group of people who've been through this situation and we can study them. We can study how they're psychologically affected. We can study how they're biologically affected, how a lot of things are affected by what they've been through. You have to be careful with that. You can get a lot of detail about someone's life, but that doesn't mean it necessarily would translate to just anyone, because that person is unique. So case studies can give us a lot of detail, but they have their limitations as well. The fourth method is the survey. You've probably taken a survey, MySpace, Facebook, Twitter. Surveys are all over the place. Anytime you are answering questions, basically that's a survey. They're not all as scientific as you might think, so you want to be able to look at them through a couple of different questions. One of which is this survey representative of who it says it is? Your textbook will tell you about a sample and a population, and how you have to have a small group of people who take your survey, the sample, that represents that larger group, that larger population. You don't have to give your survey to everyone in that population, but you do want to make sure the people you give it to represent that larger group. I can't give a survey here in Florida and then say that I found answers about all Americans, because people in Florida might answer differently than in Oregon or Arkansas. Surveys are great in that you can get a lot of information very quickly from a lot of people. You can also get information about private behaviors. A lot of times you'll see studies about teen drug use and at what age people drink or at what age people do this. They're using surveys to get that data. No one's going around to parties and just unobtrusively watching to see who's doing what. No one's purposely bringing people into labs and making 12-year-olds use drugs. That's not happening. So all they're doing is asking questions. You have to ensure that that data will be kept confidential, but you also have to remember that people aren't always honest about private behaviors, even with themselves. So again, the survey does have its limitations. Make sure you know all four. naturalistic observation, laboratory observation, case study, and survey. Know the pros and cons of all four, and know when you would use them.